and thank you for attending the 8th annual Startup Boston Week. My name is Elena, and I will be your hostess with the mostest for this session. To ensure that you are in the right place, this session that's about to kick off is Finding Balance, Preparing for Layoffs or Hiring Freezes in the Tech World. Good, everybody's where they need to be. Fantastic. Want to thank huge thank you to Suffolk University Sawyer Business School for hosting this conference. Suffolk hosts a lot of great opportunities for learning both in and outside of these classrooms. So we really appreciate their partnership in hosting the entirety of Startup Boston Week, both last year and this year. The goal behind Startup Boston Week is to connect the entire greater Boston and New England startup ecosystem community, all industries, all startup departments, and all bootstrapped and funding stages for 5 straight days of learning and connecting with one another. The team that creates Startup Boston Week is primarily volunteer, and the folks working the conference today are volunteering their time as well, including our panelists. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you all for attending this conference. It is a labor of love, and we really do appreciate you playing a role in shaping our startup community. So without further ado, thanks again. Now on to the session. I'll kick it over to our moderator, Colin.
Awesome. Thank you, Elena.
Sure.
Welcome, everybody. It's good to have you here. So if y'all are joining us, you're here to find out about how to navigate a layoff, maybe the right way. So today we have some amazing panelists joining us who are going to share some wonderful insights. Starting down at the end, we have Abby, and in the middle here, we have Sandra, and then we have Nate here right next to me, and I'm Colin. And we're going to lead a fruitful conversation about some of the do's and don'ts and strategies to actually go about a layoff in a thoughtful way, and especially focused on empathy. So today's discussion, I'm just going to jump right into it. We have several questions to get through, but at the end, if there are questions that any of you have, we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So feel free to ask us anything that's on your mind. All right, cool. So before we dive in, I think it'd be fun to just do a quick little intro, let everybody share a little bit about themselves. Abby, do you want to start?
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. I'm Abby. I've been in the People Ops Boston tech startup space for a little over 7 years now. Unfortunately, I've been part of dissolving 2 companies now. Not bragging about that, but it's been an interesting experience. I'm happy to share more about it with you all today. Currently, I am the HR business partner at Wistia, and I also run a small little HR consulting business on the side, mainly focused on startups that do not have people support and manager training, executing and implementing that. I recently left Boston and moved to Connecticut, so I'm really happy to be back today and in the city that I love so much.
Love it. Thank you, Abby.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. My name is Sandra Ma. I am the co-founder and CEO of Jovial, and we are all about how do we create the conditions for companies to build teams that are high-performing, they're more empowered and connected. And the way that we do that is 3 ways, really. The first is helping companies define their operating processes so that people are, working in the same way. And the second piece is through skills and workshops. And so again, it's that consistency of people are doing things and collaborating in a consistent way. And then the third way is through connection. And so this is a huge value for Jovial of community. It's important here at Startup Boston Week, but also within workplaces. If you don't have community, if you don't have connection, then nothing else matters. And so we help build unique experiences for companies to actually enable that. But before Jovial, I was actually leading product management teams at several tech companies, both small and large. And so as far as layoffs, I'm coming from the perspective of having managed teams and had to deal with the aftermath, so I can share that perspective, but also being on the receiving end of layoffs as well, have certainly things to share there.
Thank you, Sandra.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nate Ani. I am a recovering founder, CEO. I started a company 11 years ago, and we bootstrapped the company in the early days, and then raised money, and then I sold the company in 2022, whereafter I went on a much-needed sabbatical. and that has been a great experience. And nowadays, I'm advising startups and working on lots of AI projects. And I'm here today because not once, but twice during my startup experience, I had the unfortunate experience of having to lay off people on my team. And it was really, really challenging. And I don't think people talk about this enough. It's one of those like taboo subjects. But as I talked to other founders, I discovered that it's actually not as uncommon as you think. And it's something that a lot of founders have to go through. So I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be on the panel and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Good to have you all here. And a little about me, I'm Colin Navon. I've been in the talent acquisition space for the last decade. I'm mostly focused around tech, but as y'all know, there was a wave of tech layoffs not too long ago. So I migrated to the world of milk. It's a little bit more recession proof, and I got a baby now. So I still got lots to share. I've been victimized by layoffs a few times as well, but also helped hire some folks through that have been laid off back in the job. So excited to have this conversation with y'all, and let's just get into it. Y'all ready?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So my first question for y'all, what are some of the do's and don'ts of planning and executing a layoff? And Nate, I was wondering if you could kind of kick this one off for us.
Yeah. So like I just mentioned, when you haven't done a layoff before, it can be really scary. Your team is looking to you as a leader. They're looking for someone who's going to look out for them and their best interests. And, layoffs is it's one of those things you really have to think through carefully. It's not something you want to do kind of haphazardly, because these are people's lives. They have mortgages to pay or mouths to feed, and they're counting on you for their livelihood. So it's not something you want to take lightly. My co-founder and I spent weeks preparing, rehearsing, analyzing, really looking at what were the cuts that we absolutely had to make. And we talked about kind of how to communicate it to the whole team, how to communicate it to the individuals who are being affected. And I'd say, if there's one thing I could say not to do, is not to think about empathy, because these are people who are being affected in a really significant way. And I've heard a lot of horror stories about CEOs, founders who go about the process of informing people that they're being laid off in a really immature way. And having empathy for your employees and what they're going through, I think, is going to get you. That's half the battle, is just being able to relate to what they're going through, because it is especially in tough economic times. It's not easy for people necessarily to just find another job right away. So empathy is really, really, really key.
I like that. And that is going to be a topic that you're going to hear a lot about today, empathy. Going off of that, I think with empathy, we need to think about what is going to happen to our employees after they're laid off. So I was wondering, Abby, could you tell us maybe what goes into a reasonable severance package when you're looking at your departing employees?
Yeah. Things that are important to think about are obviously severance payout. I've been a part of a company where there was no money left. So unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. And sometimes that's the reality. But I think ultimately being as generous as you possibly can, because like Nate said, you're really rocking people's lives. I think that's something really important to consider. Another factor is benefits, especially health benefits, being really specific on when coverage is going to conclude, and COBRA, what that process looks like, how to get your family covered, yourself covered. If there's any performance bonus or equity, what that looks like for someone, how they can have access to that, if they will be paid that out, equipment, how they're going to get their laptop back. Basically, everything that someone should ask in that moment, they're going to forget. So coming more prepared with all the information is really critical. And yeah, I think healthcare is the biggest thing that people are going to be worried about, how they're going to pay the bills, that stuff. unemployment information. You could easily go online and find that. If you just Google someone's state and unemployment information, you can send them a link to that. So those are some things that I think are important when thinking about that.
I like that. Thank you. Sandra, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what Abby said, totally a lot of the things that we would expect from severance packages. I think money is always, at the end of the day, the reason you have layoffs is it's a money problem, right? So I think that makes sense is, okay, what can we offer employees with what we have left? And I think in true startup form, it's all about how do we do more with less? And so how can we use the people within our work community to actually support the people that are unfortunately being laid off in an actionable way? So, can we list these things for managers of help these people with their resumes, share job opportunities, do career counseling, create cohorts, all of these things that are very clear, to Abby's point, of what are the possibilities to help other employees.
I'll also add too, mental health support is really important. And I think sometimes in your insurance plans, it's something that's offered. So if there's any extension in coverage of healthcare, calling out those specific things for mental health coverage, or even sending a link on how to get connected with a therapist or anything, because again, these people's lives are being rocked. So however we can support them from a mental health perspective, I think is really, really going above and beyond, to your point.
Even like extending the subscription to BetterHelp or something like that. Small things can make a huge impact. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. Nate, I'm going to come back to you with this next question. I was curious, from your perspective, how is a layoff typically planned, and how long does it take to plan it and carry it out from the beginning to end?
Yeah, I think it depends on the company's circumstances, right? Like if you are running out of money, like maybe you need to execute faster. If you have the luxury of being able to plan it out, I think it's worth taking that extra time to really think about what you're going to say to the employees, whether you're going to do it, getting everyone together and making the announcement to everyone in the company, or if you're going to do it kind of on an individual basis. Obviously, there's risks telling people at different times because things can leak. So like when we did our layoff, we basically planned a whole day. We just blocked out the whole day and, set appointments on people's calendar and just kind of told everyone. So by the end of the day, everyone who was going to be laid off knew, what the situation was. And then we had told the rest of the company as well. So I think, as far as how long it takes, depends on how many people you're laying off and, like how much money you have left in the bank.
It could be tomorrow. It could be a couple weeks. Well, one thing you touched upon is those calendar invites that pop up on our calendars. I'm sure if y'all have been through a layoff, you've seen that 15-minute invite pop up and it's over, right? So I was wondering, from all y'all's perspective, like describe how that news of a layoff is communicated to employees. What are you trying to get across in that 15 minutes? Like, I know, Abby, you touched upon, some of the important things like benefits and thinking about, setting them up for the future. But I would love to, understand from all your perspectives, like what we could do to really help spread that news and communicate it in a thoughtful way. You want to start, Abby?
Everyone was looking at me. Yeah. I mean, we could probably sit here and talk all day about, is there really a right way to do a layoff? No. Maybe. I think in my experience and my opinion, those small calendar invites where you're trying to have those one-on-one touch bases with everybody throughout the day are just going to leave people on edge and super anxious. And my approach is rip the Band-Aid. Let them all know, whether it's a company-wide meeting, if you're letting the whole company go, or you're inviting the group that's been affected. There's no good way to deliver bad news. And I think ripping the Band-Aid is generally the approach that I would suggest to folks in the situation.
Yeah, I think I've seen there's a range of approaches that people take, and sometimes it's let's just get it done with. And I think that's clean, right? Like you've taken care of it, and then you can open up the floor to discussions. Mm-hmm. I think from my perspective, when you're doing these things, I would say at least give the respect and the option for people to do something in person and have that in-person conversation. So they have the space or room to share their thoughts, their feelings, right? Inevitably, this is going to be an emotional thing. We as humans are emotional creatures. And so even if somebody hated their job, right? They woke up and they're just like, I don't want to be here. They still didn't have the control in the decision. And so they're still going to have feelings about it, even if they weren't happy to be there. And so do the in-person meeting. I think over communicate though, to Abby's point of give them all the information they need. But I think really it's real talk, right? It's I think being authentic about why we're here, why this is happening. Because often when people leave those conversations and they don't feel good about it, it's because they don't have closure to understanding why. And so if you can be clear about that, and I think what Nate was talking about earlier too, of like, a lot of this is around financials. Have you done the diligence and the understanding? And if you've been transparent along the way of sharing the company's performance throughout time, then this might not be a surprise to people, right? But if you've kind of been doing the whole red, yellow, green, and it's always green or yellow, everything's like swimmingly going along, and then all of a sudden you do layoffs, then that's when you've totally lost trust with your entire company, both the people that are still going to be there and the people that you've laid off as well.
That's a big one. Hey, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, your comment reminded me of, when you ultimately have the conversation with your employees, if you've been like up to that point, you've been transparent with the team about the financial state of the company, then there's less likely to be a surprise, right? And so one thing that we did with our company is we basically empowered the team to look for cost savings, right? Like where can we lower, hosting costs? Like, do we have servers running that don't need to be running? Are there other expenses that we could eliminate that maybe we don't need? And so I think the whole team kind of knew that, hey, there's some financial challenges right now. We haven't been getting in, the sales numbers that we had expected. So there was really a sense of empowerment, like, hey, the whole company's kind of coming together to do the best we can to conserve resources. And if we're not able to, make the numbers, then people are going to have to leave, right? And that, I think when we ultimately had that conversation, it wasn't so much of a shock because I think the team kind of knew that there were challenges financially.
And I would say that's the best approach to your point, Nate. It's empowering the teams because it's like, we want this company to succeed. We all have to band together to make this work, right? Whereas if you're in the other situation where a company's like, okay, yeah, things are going great. We gloss through the weekly all hands with the dashboards. We're not actually interpreting and telling people and articulating how our performance actually is. And then layoffs happen, then it just gets, very difficult, throughout the rest of the time.
Absolutely. One topic y'all touched upon as you were talking through that was trust within your company. And I think that leads me into my next question. When you do one of these layoffs, right, and you rock the boat, you're left with people that are still at the company and you need to re-earn their trust, right? So how do you do your best to support those employees after you're done conducting a layoff? And I was curious, maybe you'd like to start this one, Sandra?
Sure. Yeah, I think, part of how you approach this depends on how the layoff was executed and how that transparency of performance and everything was executed throughout. But I think at the end of the day, back to the theme of today's discussion, it's empathy, right? And so with the people that are left behind, typically there's feelings of maybe confusion, right? They may have worked closely with the individuals that were let go. Maybe they were supposed to have a meeting with them right after, or they were working closely on a project and they're like, what am I going to do now, right? And so there's all of this uncertainty and people don't do well with uncertainty. So it's thinking about how do you provide the certainty or control that people need to get that understanding, and also just let them share their thoughts of what are they concerned about, what are the risks, how can we work together to mitigate and give them the support they need to be successful? Because I think the common thing is, okay, we have half the people now. How are we going to do all this work? It was already a struggle before, right? And so I think it's continue to reinforce the support. I think also the future, right? And so I think it's trying to articulate, and hopefully the leadership team has given managers kind of this confidence of, yes, we had to have layoffs. This was a difficult decision, but we had to do it for the sustainability of the future of our company. But we have a confident strategy moving forward that's going to transform and take us to this new level if we work together, focusing on these 3 initiatives, whatever it might be. So I think it's that conviction that managers have to do and communicate when they're talking to their teams to really help build the confidence and the trust with their existing team members.
I like that a lot. Abby, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think 2 things. When you're executing a layoff, I think, and folks are still remaining after you complete that layoff, I think from a leadership perspective, ownership as to why this is happening is really, really critical. Did you make a mistake as a leader? Is there something that could have been different? I think taking ownership is going to do a lot. Obviously, you can't fix it now, but you can learn from your mistakes. And I think explaining that to the company builds trust with the team that remains and what you're putting in place so this doesn't happen again. Also, don't say it's not going to happen again if it's going to happen again. I think that's really, really critical. And then to Nate's point earlier about cutting costs, if at all possible, if leadership is able to take a small pay cut and say, hey, this is something that we've done. We've tried to cut costs. Leadership all took a 10% pay cut to try to retain as many team members as we could. Acts like that go a long way. Sometimes when you're in the position of being laid off and you see these folks that are at the top being relatively unaffected financially, it really sucks. Because maybe you have more expenses or you're just someone who's just starting your career, whatever the situation is, right? So I think that's something too that could go a long way in building trust.
Great. Thank you for that. Nate, is there anything that you'd like to add on that topic?
Yeah, so we at my company, we did, the entire executive team took a pay cut for a period of time because we really wanted to lead by example and say like, hey, we believe in this company and we want to see it successful, and we're willing to take a sacrifice here. The other, to Sandra's point, I think it's really important as leadership that when the teammates realize that like their teammates are now gone and so like all their workload is now going to be on their plate, it's important for leadership to look at what are the initiatives that are underway at the company that maybe you can drop. Because to expect the remaining team to do the same volume of work with like half the team is, like people are not going to stick around very long if they're overworked. So it's important to like say, hey, what are initiatives that we can cut and that we can just kind of reduce the workload for the remaining team members. I think that's the responsible thing to do.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
I have
please.
something else to add. If you're in a position of leadership or you're on the people ops team, I think office hours for remaining team members could go a long way. And hey, do you want to talk about this? Obviously, sometimes you can't go into too much detail, but you can talk to them about how you're going to support them moving forward, what's changing. Sometimes people just need to know that office hours are on the table to feel better. They might not actually use them. And just know it'll take time. It'll take time to rebuild trust. And hopefully if your intentions are right, the empathy's there, you'll get there.
I like the office hours component. And I also have seen in some past experiences, those folks making themselves available for people who have been laid off for resume counseling or just career support, which I think is always important as well, which leads us into our next topic, which is what is it like to be on the receiving end of a layoff? I know this has happened to many of us. Maybe you just had a kid, maybe you just bought a house, right? There's a lot of factors that are going into play. And what is that like? And maybe, Abby, you could start us out on this one.
It sucks. My most recent experience, I had an offer accepted on my first home. And then the next day I found out my company was dissolving. So as you can imagine, it's really scary. Regardless of if I had that situation or, had a family or anything, it's scary. You're walking into the unknown, especially in this job market. It's it's scary. It's, you might have to make some pivots in what you want to do for your career. My company most recently dissolved in March, and I just started my new job. So I was laid off for 5 months. And I think some of you are like, that's nothing. And some of you may not understand that it's just a really tough job market. It just really is. So, yeah, it sucks. I think understanding the empathy, again, it's the buzzword of the day, but being able to understand that you're putting people in a situation that there are many more question marks than there are answers, and being, supportive as best you can in that situation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Sandra, is there something you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to what Abby said, right, it's back to the uncertainty and the unknown. And we as humans just don't like that unless you are in your meditative state and you've practiced that. That's been on my list to meditate, and we're working on it. But I think it's, to my point earlier, even if you didn't like your job, it's someone made the decision for you, right? It's like if you are in a relationship with a significant other, you never want to be the person that's dumped, right? You want to be the person who chooses to leave. And so, the best case scenario, the only scenario where I've seen where people are like, oh yeah, it was awesome, I was laid off, right? Is if they knew they didn't want to be in the job, they were already interviewing, and they had a job offer lined up, and they had a start date, and then it was a happy accident that they got laid off and got a severance package. Like, that's best case scenario. But in all other scenarios, it's, I'm not feeling great, and I think my first job, I was laid off. I actually started in investment banking, and this is in the height of the economic crisis. So you can calculate my age from there. And so I think, in my early 20s, as many folks feel, is they tie a lot of self-worth to their careers, to their jobs, right? Societal pressures on what does success mean. And so, I knew it was coming. I'm at my desk. I get the phone call, even though my boss is like in the conference room. He has to call me because that's what we do. And you get the talk, and then you get escorted out of the building, right? That's kind of the extreme, very finance traditional way of getting laid off. Absolutely. That's the literal walk of shame. And I would say, was tough for me. You feel almost not just the emotional, mental strain of it, but physically, your body starts to react to the stress too, even though, I did not like that job. It was totally office space. Like, I woke up every morning and I was like, this is the worst day ever. And so it's just going to take time. It's like, you're dealing with the loss and figuring out how to have some more semblance of control in your life, and realizing that there is a future. This is not the end of my story. There's so much more out there. And then I think we're all just a speck of dust in this world. So what does it really matter?
I agree with you so much in the fact that I feel like at a young age, so many of us identify with our career, and that is our whole identity. And as we get older, maybe it separates a little bit more. But when you get laid off and your identity is stripped from you, it's really hard to figure out what's next and how you're going to move forward. And I think it's really important as a recruiter and as a career advisor. I always tell people, when you're laid off, take a little time. I mean, if you have a few days, grieve. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have those emotions. We are human. And if you don't let them out, they're just going to bottle up, right? So grieve, let it out, and then take some time your next week and figure out how you're going to strategize and put your time into searching for a job the same way you would working in a role, right? So awesome. Nate, anything you'd like to add to that topic?
Well, I haven't been on the receiving end, but how many founders do we have in the room? Raise your hand. Okay, so I don't wish this on any of you to have to deliver this news, but I distinctly remember one individual telling him that we had to eliminate his role and his entire team, and he started weeping right in front of me, and it was just crushing to see the dreams that he had, and he really thought of himself as almost part owner in the business, and to see all the dedication and passion and excitement he was putting into the company just come crumbling down just in one instant. And it was heartbreaking for me to deliver that news to him. But he's since recovered. He's now working at another startup, and he's doing great. So yeah, I think, he let the emotions come out. He grieved it. He got over it. And, it's a lesson learned.
Absolutely. And through that pain, we grow stronger, right? So wonderful. All right. This next question, I think, is one that we've all kind of seen and maybe furrowed our brow a little bit. Why do organizations lay off and then rehire, a few months later for similar positions, right? We've all seen this. It's pretty egregious, right? Is there another way? Is there a better way? Sandra, what's your take on this?
They're probably just trying to spite the person they let go, honestly. I'm kidding. In my opinion, for sometimes I've seen this, I think it's just poor planning, right? And I think this goes to the whole people ops and talent acquisition perspective of how did we get to the layoff in the first place? Is it because we overhired, right? In true startup form, it's like, hey, I got all this money now. They tell us we got to grow. Let's go hire a bunch of engineers and go-to-market salespeople because we need to get some deals. But we didn't actually define their roles and responsibilities and figure out what they're actually going to own, what the initiatives are. And so now we have a really expensive problem that we've created for ourselves. So I think, in those instances, you've got to plan. HR folks have to push back on managers of what exactly are you hiring this person for, not just the generic job description, like let's tie it to projects and outcomes. And then hopefully we don't have those types of issues where, oh, just kidding, we got to actually rehire someone, after the layoff.
So more clarity around forecasting for positions and strategy of how those people are going to plug into the organization long term.
Exactly.
Got it. Awesome. Abby, anything you want to add on that?
I'll say too, I feel like HR gets a little bit of a bad rap with this stuff because a lot of times we're just the messengers and the deliverers of the bad news. So I'd also add onto what you said, leadership teams need to be better at planning too. I think that's an important message.
And I will say I was not knocking on HR teams. I was
know,
saying
Bryn.
push back on the leadership
Yes.
and management people
I agree.
and kind of question and challenge their thoughts. Yeah.
And I think don't be afraid to do that. I think you're protecting a lot of people and a lot of decisions. And sometimes people have those gut instincts and don't speak up. And if you speak up and you're wrong, you're wrong. What's the worst that'll happen? But if you speak up and you say something early, you flag something early, and you prevented, maybe you prevented a layoff from happening because you were able to make cuts, it's going to go a long way. So speak up.
Like that. Nate, this is a question for you, kind of going off the conversation we just had about, having to let that person go. Are there ever situations where maybe you can convert their status from full-time to part-time and keep them on in some capacity within the role?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier with the cost savings, like trying to cut costs, we were exploring all different scenarios because we had really good people on our team that we didn't want to let go. It was going to be really challenging to try to rehire those, speaking to rehiring people, we really wanted to keep them on the team. So we were exploring, like, could we keep them on part-time and, or could we keep them on full-time, but they take a pay cut? And so we were like exploring all these options and weighing that. I distinctly remember creating like a matrix, like a decision matrix, like pros and cons of all these different options. And ultimately we decided that like keeping people on part-time was actually going to probably be less beneficial as a solution than just having dedicated full-time people. And so we didn't make that decision, but that was one of the options we were exploring, is like, could we retain talent, but just pay them for half their time? And there were some other challenges, like typically health insurance goes away when you reduce people's status from full-time to part-time. And some of our employees were really dependent on the health insurance. So there's some like legal logistical things that became problematic with doing it that way.
Great answer. Thank you. All right. So, Sandra, this next question is for you, kind of going back to a topic we were discussing earlier around how do organizations deal with the declining morale due to recent layoffs, right? How do we rebuild that joy within the company and rebuild that trust so that people still want to come to work and they don't come to work with fear that they're going to get, the axe the next week?
Yeah. And I think it's to what we were talking about earlier of that trust. And I think the intention is that you're not trying to rebuild. You should have that trust there already if you've been transparent, You've been clear with performance. You've been communicative on what the company's goals are and initiatives and what we're all setting out to do. And if you do that, then when a layoff happens, then you won't really have to do as much of that rebuilding. It'll be more of the, let's continue to reiterate what we're trying to do and what we're here for. And I think, the joy part is hard. I think, you get to a place where you, again, build the confidence with the people that are left behind to say, hey, we believe in you all in getting us to what our goal is. And we also believed in the people that had to let go. We care about them and show that you are trying to actually help, the people that were let go. And it's not just, like lip service of, yeah, we're here to help, and be actionable, right? And be actually, doing things that are going to help people and move them forward, and continuing that conversation.
That's great. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Abby?
Yeah, I think it's all about perception too. Don't do a layoff and then have a holiday party. Don't do a layoff and then send a really bougie gift to your remaining team members. You all might be laughing in your head, but you'd be surprised. So be really thoughtful and intentional because perception matters. Be careful what you post on LinkedIn afterwards. All those things that feel like common sense, just remember them.
Yeah, it's really tempting to want to blow up a company after you get laid off, but remember that all the other companies you're trying to get hired are going to see that. So be mindful. I like it. Cool. So my next question is more around the mental health impact, right? Like we touched upon this earlier, but I think it's really important. Like we're all human, and what steps can companies take to really support the mental health and the well-being of those people that are not only laid off, but the people that remain, right? And I'd love to start off with you, Abby, because you were touching upon this earlier, and I think you had some really fruitful points.
Yeah, and some of it might be repetitive, but I think from a mental health perspective, those lists that go around where you get to put your name and your LinkedIn and what you're looking for, just kind of whether recruiters actually look at that or not, it's some semblance.
Those
you
Excel
do.
sheets.
Good. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They do. They look at them. So, put your information on it. I think if you send that out, it's just showing that you care about your team members, which can go a long way from the mental health perspective. As long as you can extend health insurance, do it, and highlight some of those options that you have in terms of mental health coverage. Some healthcare insurance plans offer that. I think it's really important to maybe you connect people, just showing some semblance of you care, even after they've left your company, goes a long way from feeling like they are valued. We are valued, the people that are laid off, and that can help with mental health stuff. Yeah,
I like what you talked about connection. And I think that brings a lot of people together in terms of, we've all gone through these, right? And so having somebody that you can fall back on, a community, when both you're going through it or maybe you're trying to help others and lift them up, it's nice to have somebody that you can fall back on, a shoulder that you can lean on, per se.
If I can add one
Yes,
thing to
please.
that. So on the topic of community, when people get laid off, it can be very isolating, right? They've lost their team, their community, camaraderie. And so one thing that we did is we launched a alumni Slack community for everyone who wanted to stay in touch. Obviously, we couldn't keep them on the official company Slack anymore, but we started another Slack, and that provided a support forum for those who had been affected to kind of talk through, job offers and, hey, just talk to each other about what they were going through and what they were feeling. And I think that helped a lot of the people kind of get through the process, just knowing that they weren't alone. There were other people that were going through the same.
+1 to the Slack channel. I also think in a lot of situations, the layoff happens in a quick 15-minute phone call. And in this world, maybe a lot of us are remote. I know I am. And so all of a sudden your computer goes black and you're like, what the heck just happened? Those Slack communities are a way for employees to come together and say, what just happened? Are you okay? I'm okay. How can we all band together? And I think that definitely goes a really long way and is really, really helpful.
Yeah,
It's been helpful for
I've
me.
been a part of a few of those, and just being able to resume workshop or just being able to support one another. When you're down, you're having a rough day, be able to lift somebody up with a few good jokes or something of that sort. So I love the idea of a Slack channel. Sandra, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think like having that continuity, because again, it's back to the closure, right? And so if you just rip the Band-Aid off, oftentimes people don't get to say their goodbyes. It's like a virtual goodbye, right? And so you are left with a lot of these loose ends and you're not given that chance. And so even like to take it a step further, I would love to see if companies would actually help facilitate in-person gatherings for these people that were let go, right? Like understandably, right? Yeah, it's like, okay, maybe you can't like officially put your stamp on it, but maybe you find someone in that group who's a natural leader, facilitator, who will help bring everyone together. So they have that chance to kind of commiserate together, support each other, and then that continues to help, as they go on and look for their next opportunity. I think that makes a huge difference. And I think to everything else we were talking about the resumes and how we can help, it's all about the clarity and specificity in terms of how people share how they can help. Because if you just keep it ambiguous and you're like, let me know how I can help, it's kind of like, well, I don't know. You tell me how you can help, right? And so you've got to list the things that you can help with and then give people, that kind of gives people the permission to reach out to you, to be like, yeah, I do need that help that you're offering. And then, it opens up the conversation.
Yeah, let me know if you see that I'm connected to someone and I can make an introduction, or let me know if I can look at this and offer you some feedback, something along those lines, making it more specific. I love that. Because I have had people like tell me many a times, let me know if I can help. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to approach this. But I also
use those people that say they can help. Use those people.
Lean on
They
them.
actually want to help you. Think about if you're in your own shoes, right? And someone reaches out to you and says, hey, I see you're connected to Sandra. I'm applying to a job at her company. Do you know her? Will you intro me? If they don't know her, they'll say, hey, I don't know her. But if they do know her and they went to school with her, then amazing. They can send that message. They can introduce you. That's literally how I got my job.
Yeah. And networking is huge, y'all.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to get noticed nowadays, like you kind of need to network. So, all right, cool. I'm going to wrap this up with one more question before we kind of open it up to the floor here. I really wanted to kind of focus in on our own personal experiences, and maybe some lessons that you've learned from either really exceptionally well done layoffs or poorly done layoffs, and things that you can share with the room here today. Nate, would you like to start on that topic?
Like I was saying before, when I had to face the prospect of doing these layoffs, I hadn't done it before. And so I started reaching out to other founders, like in the Techstars network and elsewhere. And the number of founders who I talked to who said, oh yeah, we overhired, or, we were given that growth prerogative, like you got to grow, and we hired more people. So it was actually really reassuring for me to hear that this is not as uncommon as you think, and that a lot of other founders struggle with this decision, and many are going through it, for the first time, and they don't know how to execute it. So, just going back to what I said at the beginning of the session, just be really methodical about it, and thoughtful and empathetic, and remember these are people and you're affecting their lives, and imagine you're in their shoes and you're on the receiving end of hearing this news, and to the point of like offering help. Like, I think the more specific you can be, like whether that's, hey, look through my LinkedIn network and anyone on my LinkedIn, let me know if you want an intro. I'm happy to write an intro for you. Or you need help, reviewing your resume, or you want me to look at a few companies. I did a lot of these, like finding jobs and then sending them to people on my team to like try to connect them and help them find jobs. And I think that just showing that extra effort can go a really long way for people to feel like they're being supported and you're really looking out for them.
Definitely helping to get the wheels back on the bus, for sure. Sandra, how about you?
Yeah, I think, I shared my first layoff experience. I've also had to like shut down. I can't log in like, oh, this is weird. Must be an IT issue. Oh, wait, I was let go, right? And I've also observed experiences as well. And I think what I noticed about a lot of them is that they're very impersonal, very transactional, right? And I think they diminish the humanity of people. And I think exactly what Nate and everyone has been saying too. It's like, remember that we're all humans. Everyone's trying to do their best. Everyone's going through unforeseen circumstances that you may or may not know about. And so I think a lot of times what leadership teams, their approach to this is, here's the script that you must stick to, right? But of course, there's compliance, legal things that we have to stick to, but I think you have to make sure people are speaking authentically. They're being very honest. Otherwise, you're reducing people to widgets, and nobody likes that. You just feel like you were kind of used and that you weren't actually valued as an employee. And so, it's all back to the understanding, the validation, the clear support. I think even when you're offering for help too, of like, keep that person in your mind, the people that were let go, I think like ask them questions too of, what do they think they want to do next? And maybe help them brainstorm. Because I think oftentimes when you get laid off, it's kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So, maybe I just need a sounding board. And maybe that person can actually help you figure out what are potential paths, and think of specific people that would be good for them to talk to. And I think those things are always, they go a long way.
Like the coaching and mentorship conversations, definitely. How about you, Abby?
I'll be quick. I think that agree with both what Nate and Sandra said. I think I'll add, if you don't know, ask an employment lawyer. If you don't know what the right thing to do is, make sure that you're talking to the people that do. I think that this is very real, and you don't want to get your company stuck in a situation that makes it worse. And again, treat people like humans, treat people like people, because that's what they are. And it goes a lot farther when you do that. And if you're someone who unfortunately has to do this, and layoffs happen, right? It would be great if we didn't have to have this conversation, but we are. Take ownership on what you can be doing better for the next time, and just really be there for the people and move forward.
My own take before we hand it over to questions. If you're in a hyper growth state and you're growing, I think one thing to remember is everyone that you're bringing in is working with immense passion and dedication to their role. And oftentimes we see these people get cut maybe right before their vesting cliff, right? And it's brutal. Like, it's happened to many of us. So if you're in the position and you're going through one of these layoffs, consider the impact this is going to have on the people that are getting cut. They put a lot of work in. If you can give them a laptop to help with their job search, if you can accelerate their vesting cliff so they at least feel like they got a piece of the pie, do that. Do whatever you can to give back to these people that have helped further your company. And I think that's the message that we want to get across. So cool. That was amazing. I really appreciate all y'all joining us for this. Before we wrap up, I want to open it up to the floor. I want to see what questions y'all have. And we've got our wonderful mic runner over here ready to go. Jimmy, take it away.
Hi, thanks for this. A little too close to home. I'm a VP of growth at a Vista Equity company for about 3 more weeks. I've been through this before, and one quick comment for the men, there's a very different psychological impact, and so there's lots of resources online. I can't speak for the women, but men take this situation in a totally different direction, so I would just encourage you to look online for the different resources. But one question I have is, as a marketing leader in tech, I think it's known that our tenure is like 16 months, on average. I'm wondering if you're seeing any trends where people are trying to negotiate up front the inevitable layoff, because we're starting to feel like, and I've had conversations with other PE leaders around, we're being traded like pro athletes at certain levels. And of course, they all have their exit packages up front, like coaches and players. Are you seeing any of that, or is the market just too saturated for this kind of role?
I can take this to start. I mean, at least from a career perspective and leading talent, I have seen at the higher level, certainly more of those things being built into their employment contract, whether it be a severance out the gate, or they have a timeline of how much money they will get paid out, and it will be written into their contract. I find with the lower level jobs, unfortunately, they don't take that into consideration as much as they should, but it should be something that we consider going long term.
Yeah, I'd say unfortunately it's the latter part of your question where the market's just really saturated right now. I haven't seen that happen in a very, very long time where folks can put a clause in their employment letter up front stating that, should there be a layoff, they get X amount of severance or something like that. I think you'd be really lucky to find that. I don't know if that's much of a reality anymore.
Everything's negotiable though, so worst they can say is no.
True.
Awesome panel. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Mike.
You guys have mentioned some of the cracks that form trust, maybe culture, but like, what does day one look like post layoff? And really, what is the expectation like when you get back up and running as an organization?
I think one thing that I've appreciated is allowing employees to take the day, remaining employees to take the day to process, to grieve, to just understand what happened. No one's going to be able to focus on work. Maybe the next day one after everyone comes back is an all hands. What are things going to look like moving forward? What projects are we pausing because we understand that X percent of the company has just been gone. So the expectation of things being delivered at the same pace is unreasonable. So I think those are some things I would take away.
Yeah, I would echo what Abby has shared. I think it's a continuation, right? I think letting people process is super important. And I think the day one is let's have these open discussions and get everyone's concerns out. And then as management, it's their responsibility to take action and make plans based on those discussions. And so I think after day one, it's like, all right, let's go. Here's what we set out to do. And I, as a manager, am going to help you all succeed in getting these things. And this is how we're going to do it. And so again, it's that conviction and confidence of the way forward.
And to that point, strap your leaders and your managers with talk tracks. A lot of times employees will go to their direct manager. And if their manager is saying, I don't know anything, it feels, as an IC, individual contributor, it feels not great if your manager doesn't even know what's going on. So maybe having a meeting with your managers or your leadership team and having them understand how to talk about this, how we're going to move forward, and giving them the tools to be able to reassure the folks that are remaining will go a long way too.
One thing that came to mind for me is, especially within the tech world, I think a lot of us operate in like 2-week sprints, for instance. And I think when a layoff happens, before we just jump right into another sprint, like with running, like actual sprinting, you have to warm up, you have to stretch, and you have to be mentally prepared to go into that, right? And I think after a layoff, it's really important to focus in on those pre-steps before you just go out and run again, right? Because if you're just running for the sake of running, you got no direction to go, right? So figure out your path and then figure out how you're going to execute on it.
So my question is, so not only are hiring freezes and layoffs happening, but for entry-level jobs, they're requiring years of experience. And my question is, for someone early in their career, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. I'm going to take this one first.
Yeah.
Cool. I've certainly seen this time and time again, jobs that require 3 to 5 years experience when they're looking for somebody fresh out of school, right? I think the biggest thing to do is look at ways that you can pivot existing experience and formulate it in a way that showcases you've done this. It might not have to be in a professional capacity. Maybe you've done some volunteer work. Build that into, your years of experience. Maybe you've had a couple of internships. Maybe you've worked on some projects outside of school. Focus on your resume there, and then showcase through your own abilities and your talking points how you can, lead up to that and grow into that. Does that help?
Yeah, I would say some of it exactly to what Colin said. It's positioning of the experience that you've had so far, the projects that you've done, whether it was in school or formal, it doesn't matter. And then I would also say not every company is like that. I personally, I don't like when companies do that. I also don't like when companies say you have to have very certain regimented type of experience. I think when I came from product, for instance, I think there were a lot of companies, the school of thought was product, you have to have specifically only product management or engineering experience. Otherwise, we're not going to consider you. I'm very much, I don't care where you came from, what your experience is. If you show me you can problem solve, if you show me how you think, and if you're curious, then let's chat. And that's what I care more about. And I think I would say to you, look for those companies that are more open-minded to that, because if it's someone that's trying to get, cheap labor, but they're expecting experience, you probably don't want to work for them anyways.
Yeah.
And also shoot your shot. A lot of times companies will post a certain range of years, but they don't actually know what they want, right? So shoot your shot and write a good cover letter, because it's the dying art that no one's really doing these days. And it truly expresses why you're passionate about that company or that role over just every other company out there.
I'll flip your question too real quick. And if you're a company hiring an entry-level role with years of experience, don't. And if you're hiring a VP or director level, and just be really mindful of the salary band and be really realistic as to what you're actually going to get. These are people and they should be treated as such.
Great.
Oh, that's loud. I was a executive at my startup, and we had to go through layoffs. And one of the things is, I wish a panel like this existed, because I was making it up from scratch. But some of the good things that we did, because it's one of my proudest management moments, is we gave people months of warning. We said, you will not have to worry that your job's at risk. We will let you know 1 month ahead of time, and you are guaranteed 2 weeks of severance. And so they knew they didn't need to jump ship. If we were running out of money and cutting salaries and all the other things that we tried to be creative about, they did not worry about their job at all. And because of that, after we did the layoffs and we raised some money, I hired back 6 out of 9 of them. They were so excited to come back. What also would have been great when I was trying to plan this all out was to hear what not to do. So I was wondering if you guys would offer specific stories of ones that didn't go well, and I will toss out one of those for you. And it wasn't my experience, it was a friend who's in HR. Their company just collapsed, and the CEO pulled everyone into a room at the last minute, got up in front and said, today's your last day, there's no severance, no benefits, and I am gonna go shut off my phone and I'm not talking to anyone. And he walked out of the room.
Wow, brutal.
Yeah.
Well, I can share one of my own personal experiences. I had been with a company. I just bought a house, and I had been there for literally a week, and found out I was getting laid off. And they only gave me 2 weeks severance, which was really freaking scary, because you're like, how am I going to keep this house? I think in those situations, it's important to think about, tenure of the employee, but also think about the landscape that this employee is going to have to go out into. If the job market is good, sure, 2 weeks might be able to get them an interview, but it's not going to get them a job. I mean, any job is going to take another probably 2 weeks to go through the background check. So think about the timeline that you're setting this person up for. Think about, is the severance package reasonable, or am I just screwing this person over, for lack of better words? And then and kind of think about it holistically from that lens, I would say.
Yeah, I would say the pull the plug experience I had was tough mentally, again, with the self-worth, because I think for me, I was I gave so much to this company. I contributed so much. And then to feel so underappreciated, right? I was I just planned this huge offsite for multiple teams. And then, they clearly had planned this before. And I'm I feel really used, right? And so it goes back to I like how your company and your approach was be transparent, right? Let's settle the uncertainty up front. So people aren't making up their own stories in their head of what could happen.
Thanks for the question, Sandra. I love what you said earlier too about the company's responsibility in internally reporting out financially. So just as a way to build trust. I'm curious about exit interviews. It's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? There's a really sensitive time, but it's also important to hear people's opinions when they're walking out the door, implement those changes, or do folks not even really care about doing those kinds of things, frankly?
So at least from my perspective, I think exit interviews are hit or miss, right? You're going to hear a lot of stuff about, people's thoughts on the company. Some of it's going to be raw and emotional. Some of it's going to be legitimate. I think for companies, it's what you do with that information, right? Like, are you going to put that into practice for the next time so you can be more thoughtful? Or are you just going to like file it in some folder and throw it in a filing cabinet, right? Like, I think there's a obvious outcome and then a poor outcome to it. What about you, Nate? Any thoughts from that? Saw the gears turning.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when I've done exit interviews. It's usually because I'm trying to understand what could have done better to retain. Like if an employee quits, this is not in a layoff situation, but let's say they quit, I want to know what could we have done, if there's anything we could have done to retain that employer, if it's someone that we really want to retain. So I think in that case, doing an exit interview can be really instructive because it can help you for your next hire. Create the right incentives, and if they had a particular beef with you, that's also maybe good to know. Like one things that we did at my companies, we did a 360-degree review where everyone basically gave their feedback to me as the CEO of like, hey, here's what we like, here's what we don't like, and that was like super eye-opening for me. Like, getting honest truth from my team, and it could be anonymous too. They didn't have to put their name on it. So. And we did that for like the whole company. So everyone did a 360 review of all their direct reports and management. So that's another thing you can do as an alternative to exit interviews that can be really, really helpful for people to really kind of have their eyes open as to, how they could be a better manager or employee.
I totally agree with that. I think in lieu of the exit interview, right, if you've had open communication and feedback throughout time, you shouldn't need that. You should already know, right? So a lot of times when I've experienced exit interviews or have chatted with colleagues about it, they're kind of like, why should I even talk to you? Because we already talked about these things. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, hopefully you've been getting feedback along the way and communicating clearly.
Yeah, I think I'm going to state the obvious, but if you're doing a layoff, do not do an exit interview.
Yeah.
Why are you leaving? Well, because you told me to. I don't think that's going to be an effective conversation. I think more so flip it and say, this is what I learned from the layoff experience as a leader, and this is what I'm going to do different next time. Maybe you share that with the employees that are sticking around. I think exit interviews are meant for folks that are voluntarily leaving your company and regretfully leaving your company, so you can understand what you could have done better to retain that talent.
Thank you all. I hate to cut it short, but we are at time. So thank you all very much. Let's give a big round of applause to all of our panelists. We do have a lot more in store for you all today, and for the rest of the week. We have a career fair that will be kicking off in this room later tonight at around 6 p.m. However, next stop up is to PIP or not to PIP. So if that's what you're looking for, stick around. That'll be kicking off at 2:30. If that is not what you're looking for, then I'm sorry, but you're going to have to leave. No, but the folks at the registration desk can help you get to where you need to get to. If you are sticking around, make sure you have your QR codes ready. We will be coming around to scan those and check you in for the next session. If you are joining us virtually, don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a few short minutes. One plug, you probably saw him bouncing around. He did just leave. Kevin Ty from 3 Circle Studios is our photography partner for Startup Boston Week. So definitely make sure that when you see him, have him snap your photo. I have the QR code right here so that you can download your own personalized photo album for Startup Boston Week and keep it for the many years to come in remembrance of your wonderful time that you're having this week. So thank you all very much. Again, big round for our panelists. And enjoy Startup Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
Appreciate y'all.